This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not provided as financial, legal, or any other advice. The information is not investment advice or an offer to buy or sell any securities or make any investment. The views expressed by guest speakers are their own, and any reference to third-party products, services, or information does not constitute an endorsement thereof by SNN or its affiliates. SNN expressly disclaims all liability for any individual's use of the information presented in this podcast. My guest on the show today is John Suzuki, CEO of BK Technologies Corporation. It's a publicly traded company. The symbol is BKTI on the NYSE American. BK Technologies Corporation, through its operating subsidiaries, manufactures high specification, American-made communications equipment of unsurpassed reliability and value for use by public safety professionals and government agencies. BK Technologies' SaaS business focuses on new, innovative public safety smartphone services that will make the first responders safer or more productive. BK Technologies participated at our event in Las Vegas in April 2023. And as host, I was running around, didn't get a chance to hear their Q&A with Scott Weis from Semco Capital live, but did have a chance to listen to it on our YouTube channel. After watching that, I invited CEO John Suzuki on to better understand what the land mobile radio competitive landscape looks like, who BK Technologies competes with, their focus on providing radio communications for the wildland fires market, and how they are looking to expand to more verticals, how folks should think about their financial performance, specifically regarding gross margins, and why radios are still a viable technology that folks use and need. With that, please enjoy my conversation with John Suzuki, CEO of BK Technologies. John, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, Bobby. Thanks for having me on your show. Appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. It's great to have you on. BK, you guys just presented at our event in Vegas, and you did that fireside chat with Scott, and Scott was like, dude, you should have him on the podcast, learn a little bit further, because I'm running around like a nut job hosting these things. So I didn't get a chance to hear the whole thing. So I'm excited for the opportunity here. So, to start us off, this is a question I ask everybody on here as a first question. If you had to describe BK Technologies in one line, how would you describe the company?
Well, I can tell you what we do, right? We design and manufacture wireless radio communications equipment for the public safety market. In terms of the company, we've been in business for 70 years.
Perfect. Hey, that's a pretty solid one line right there. I had one that I think land mobile radio devices to the emergency and first responder market. So I think that all works pretty well. So let's get a history of the company. As you said, the company's been around for 70 years. From your understanding, looking back at the history, what would you say was the original thesis for the company's founding? And then maybe catch us up to 2023 and how we exist today.
Yeah, I would say for the majority of the history of the company has been focused in one segment of the public safety market. That segment is known as wildland fire. So, especially today, turn on the TV, the terrible incident in Hawaii where wildland fire engulfed a community. This is the type of market that we have been servicing for the majority of the history of the company. So every year, 50 or 60,000 firefighters and support staff fight these wildland fires throughout the country. And BK provides the radio communications to these first responders.
Yeah, no, just that was something I was going to bring up a little bit later, but we might as well tackle it right now. The wildfires has been unfortunately just a more reoccurring occurrence, a reoccurring experience. I'm out in the suburb of Los Angeles. That's something that we think about on a yearly basis of like, okay, we're right on the road off of where the big Malibu fire was that engulfed, I think that was in 2018, so that's something that we think about quite a bit. But, from just thinking about it from a business perspective with regard to BK, why is your product suite really well suited to serve when these emergency responders for when these fires break out?
No, that's a fair question, Bobby. So I think that goes back to the original mission of the company. We seem to have focused on these firefighters. So, I'll give you an example of some of the unique requirements, right? When you're in the middle of nowhere in California, they're fighting a fire, you get literally dropped in. Having AC power is not something, it's like a luxury. It's not something that you would have. If you're on the fire line, especially, there is no AC outlet that you can go plug in your radio and get a recharge from. And so one of the unique features of wildland fire radio is to be able to work using a AA alkaline battery pack. And so the disposable batteries is the mainstay for powering radios for wildland fire. That's very unique. If you look at firefighters in urban centers, suburban centers, I mean, they go home and they recharge their batteries. They have rechargeable batteries, and that's more normal in our industry. So that one unique feature was a key differentiator, and we were one of those manufacturers who are willing to design an alkaline battery pack. A second good example is with wildland fire, it moves, right? And you see that in the state of Hawaii more recently, the power of these fires and the speed at which they can engulf a community or acres of land is extremely fast. Well, you need to have communications over the area that you have these first responders operating in. One day the fire could be in one location, but literally the next day it could be 20 or 30 miles away. And so every day during a wildfire, they're always updating their communication plan so that the first responders have a new set of radio frequencies that they could operate on. BK developed a technology which allowed the speedy cloning of these radio frequencies from device to device. It's called radio cloning. And that's, again, a very unique feature for the land mobile radio market. It's very specific to wildland fire. And BK was a pioneer in that technology. And now over the years, 40 years plus, right, we have generations of radios. We have about 250,000 radios out there. And this technology only works between BK radios. So that's given us a very strong position in this particular market. But those are two examples of technologies that you wouldn't see in normal first responder radios.
100%. And, in thinking about that, and that makes all the sense in the world, right? Like you would think that, these agencies would want to use have the best equipment possible in order to enable the highest quality communication between first responders as well as back to home base to make sure that everything is, everybody's on the same page here. But when you think about the competitive landscape, I'm sure some of the, folks that might look at BK and think like, all right, okay, we hear that, the technology mode here that you have, but at the end of the day, we're talking about radios. Like, are, the same folks that you're trying to sell into, are they just trying to get, what they need, at the lowest cost possible? So can you tell us a little bit about the dynamics of the customer base that you're selling into and how BK just wins out over some of your competitors out there?
Well, at first I'd say we have about 95% of that market, wildland fire market. It's just not a big market. As it relates to the $2.3 billion radio market in the U.S., it's quite small. And again, the reason why we own that market primarily is because of this cloning technology. Initially, when we started selling into the market, it was designing a radio that was more suited for wildland fire and how they use the radios. The clamshell battery was a great example. They couldn't use rechargeable batteries, and we were one of the first to pioneer that. I think that established us as a supplier for wildland fire for the uniqueness of their application. And then the cloning technology is what kept us in the game, because you have generations of radios. These radios last 10, 15 years. And in some cases, we have customers that have our radios that are 20 years old. And so when you're dealing multiple generations of radios, the ability for that technology to be common amongst those of those generations and be able to communicate, I think, is a key reason. Again, this cloning technology is only applicable between BK radios. So a competitor coming in, he's got a huge disadvantage because of the 250,000 radios we have embedded in the field, which is the majority of the radios for wildland fire in the US.
Absolutely. Speaking to to your customer base that are already customers of BK Technologies, what's the rebuying rate, right? Like how often are they getting new radios, or what is there a recurring aspect to at least on the hardware side?
Yeah, I mean, we shipped, I think it was around 25,000 radios last year. This year it's 32 to 36. So we've seen a huge increase, and we can talk about why that's the case. But if you think about it, right, if we've got about 250,000 radios in the field, these things last about 10 years. Just a refreshment of the fleet, you're talking about 25,000 radios a year. Sometimes it could be a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, but that's where you kind of get it. This year and at the end of last year is a little bit different. And that's because of the new series radios that we have introduced and the broader market appeal outside of wildland fire. So we're tapping into these broader markets.
Let's talk about that a little bit. What are the broader markets that you're getting into, and tell us how it's been progressing.
Yeah. So again, the U.S. market is about $2.3 billion. To put that in context, it's about 600,000 or 700,000 radios that are sold every year. Last year we shipped 25,000. This year it's 32 to 36. So pretty small number in comparison to the total number of radios shipped in this marketplace. I think the difference that we're seeing is in the new series radios that we developed. So about 4 or 5 years ago, the board was asking some similar questions you're asking, right? You guys all have radios. Why can't we sell radios into the broader market? And it was mainly because the radios were very much designed for wildland fire, which was great. But it didn't allow us to kind of extend into the broader market space, which is police, law enforcement, structure fire, ambulance. Again, these are our first responders that would operate more in the urban and suburban environments. So it's a completely different environment in which they're operating in. So the question is why can't we build one radio that serves both markets? And the answer is, of course we can. It just takes money. And so the last 5 years, if you look at our expenses on R&D, it's been about 20% of our revenues in R&D. So quite substantial overall. But because of that investment, we were able to introduce a whole new set of radios. So the first radio was the BKR 5000 portable. Basically, that was a replacement radio for our wildland fire radio. But again, with the foresight that it could be sold into the extended markets, law enforcement, structure fire, etc. We introduced that in the latter part of 2020, and 21 was our first year of full sales for that radio. And if you look at the company's financials, we actually booked about $55 million in new business in that year, which was a company record. And the reason for that was people who had not traditionally bought from us in the past, or adjacent agencies who understand BK, but are now looking at, hey, maybe we'll use that for the sheriff's office. They started buying radios from us because they felt they understood the brand, and they saw that this radio was a radio that suited their needs for law enforcement or structure fire. You extend that forward into 2022, we kind of broke all records. We did about $70 million in new business, and again, that was heavily driven by the BKR 5000. This year, we've introduced another new radio, the 9000, which is I would say, a Cadillac type radio that's really targeted at these law enforcement structure fire users. It's what we call an all-band radio, and I'll talk a little bit about that and the differences. But basically, if I compare the two devices, the 5000 and the 9000, the 5000 addresses maybe 15% of that $2.3 billion market. whereas the 9000 addresses the lion's share, or 85% of that overall market. So while we've had great success with the 5000, and it certainly proved out our thesis that we could sell into markets beyond our traditional markets, it's limited in terms of its addressable market. The 9000, which we just launched in June of this year, it picks up the balance of the market, about 85% of that market. And we think that it will open up these verticals for us that we have not participated in the past.
Yeah, no, I saw in your Q2 presentation that you completed in Q2 2023 the first shipment of the BKR 9000 multi-brand band radios to the U.S. Army, right? So yes. Yeah, I mean that's a logo to put on.
It is.
So can you tell us a little bit about that first shipment and how this is an example of what you're trying to capture, that other 85% of the market?
Yeah, maybe I'll start by explaining the difference between the 5000 and the 9000. Of the 600,000 or 700,000 radios, majority of them are what we call single band radios. So they operate on one of the 4 LMR frequency bands, and the BKR 5000 falls into that category. And that's the lion's share of the radios sold today are in that space. Now, from a market standpoint or a first responder standpoint, while having a single band radio is great, it operates on their system. The challenge that they have is when they operate perhaps on a state system or an adjacent county system, there's no guarantee that they'll operate in the same frequency band. And so if you have a radio that can't operate on that same frequency band, then they can't communicate. The way to kind of look at that is in the early days of cellular, when cellular first came out, it was in the 800 megahertz band, and then it just seemed like every 6 months there's more and more spectrum allocated to cellular, and you had to keep changing your phone so that the phone could operate on all these different bands. And today you don't really think about it, right? You buy a phone and it operates anywhere, and it's because it's what we call an all-band cell phone. So the 9000 is the same idea. It's an all-band LMR radio. And the tendency is that if I had a choice between buying a single band radio and an all band radio, I would buy the all band radio because I could use it for operating in adjacent counties. Basically, I can go anywhere in the U.S. and operate it, whether it's on a wildland fire site or downtown New York. And that's the general concept of it.
Very good. So the next topic I wanted to get into is now clearly margin. It seems like is something that, both your current stakeholders and probably folks that are looking at BKTI take very seriously when considering adding BKTI or starting to follow it, whatnot. I mean, just on your presentation, I think 3 slides were just dedicated specifically to talking about, targeting incremental gross margin improvement. So can you tell us a little bit about that? It looks like year over year from Q2 2022 to Q2 2023, it very much improved over, about 13%, as well as the net loss going down, year over year, looking at that as well. So love to better understand that. And then what is your strategy in order to continue to improve gross margin?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, Bobby. Like most hardware companies, 22 was an extraordinary year for the global supply, and we were no exception. We experienced component shortages and price increases throughout the year. I think our worst quarter was in Q2 of last year, where we had 14% gross margins, and a lot of that was driven on the ability to ship things, as well as the cost at which you were paying for parts to ship those products. I would say certainly that was an extraordinary year. Previous to that, historical margins have been 35, maybe 40%. If you go back in time, and that's our plan, is to get back to those historical margins, but by 25 to exceed that, mainly because of the 9000 and its improved margins of that particular product. So on mix, we think that the core portfolio will get into that 35 to 40, and then if you add in the 9000, which is a substantially higher gross margin radio, the mix of the two will get us into the high 40s, maybe even 50% by 2025. So we've been on a journey, right? I mean, certainly trying to get the supply of the components, and as prices have come down, we've seen our margins improve from the low of 14% to, I think in the last quarter we were about 27%. Still a ways away from the 35 to 40%, which is the more historical side. We see improvements in third and fourth quarter, and as we go throughout next year. Some of these improvements are coming from the normalization of that material cost, but more importantly, it's in our cost improvements. And I'll just speak to that for a couple minutes. When we introduced the 5000 as an example, we decided that we were going to bring or manufacture that in the US. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that was a decision that was made. I think that during COVID and post-COVID, just the cost of manufacturing in the US has really escalated. And what we were thinking we were going to be able to do versus what you can actually do after all the labor increases and shortages and everything else, there was definitely a difference. And we need to take costs out of our radio to get our margins back and normalized. The second part was the legacy radios that we had were historically manufactured in Asia. And then again, as part of the insourcing strategy, we decided to bring it to the US, again, right over COVID. And so the ending product costs that we were seeing were much higher than what we were enjoying, I guess, pre-COVID. And again, we had to go through a process of taking costs out of these radios. So we have a plan. We have the ability to take costs out of our product. It's just taking a bit of time to get the engineering completed, get the products introduced into the factory. But we expect to be, for these series radios, to be back in that 35 to 40% gross margin. And then again, with the 9000, it's comparatively, it's like twice the price of a 5000. So a 9000 is twice the price. Cost wise, it's only marginally more expensive. So you're talking a significantly uplift on the gross margins. So the more 9000 you ship, the higher the mix, and the overall gross margins for the company should increase. And that's why we're confident that we can get quarter over quarter gross margin improvements, and why we set our target at 50% gross margins for 2025. It's aggressive, but it's doable.
Yeah, I like it. I gotta say, I like when management team, when you put out that type of goal for yourself and you publicly say it, and hey, now it's just a matter of execution, right?
That's right.
So, it also seems like part of this story too is the launch of from what I've seen both in the presentation and in talking with with John and stuff, getting prepared for the interview today. It sounds, the company is introducing a SaaS solution as well, software as a solution. And we all know that, on the software side, the margins on that are much higher, so that can, help in terms of those goals, but aside from just that incentive, what is the need in this market for a SaaS solution? Can you explain that a little bit further?
Yeah, I think the easiest way is to look at what's happened with public safety communications over the last 10 years. So up until about 2010, the majority of the communications was over land mobile radio, and it's primarily voice communications. But when LTE was introduced into the market space, so cellular 3G, 4G type technologies, the data speeds and the coverage were greatly enhanced. And so public safety started a journey where they started utilizing cellular for data communications. And you can see that in a police vehicle today. They got cameras, they got PCs. What that's done for the first responder community is they have more access to real-time information, which makes them safer or more productive. And so over the last 10, 12 years, public safety has made a huge investment, in addition to the investments they've done in LMR, right? So this is a plus up. They spent more money on these types of applications that ride over the cellular network to basically give their first responders access to this type of information in the field. And that transformation has happened over the last 10 or 12 years. So now, as we look forward, right, and a lot of companies, by the way, were started and have been very successful in that field. It created an entirely new market space that supported a whole host of companies. But if you look forward in the market space, you say, what's that next wave of public safety communications? And we believe at BK, the next wave in public safety communications is when that first responder, when he steps out of his vehicle. So when he steps out of his vehicle, what does he have? He has hopefully a BK radio. That's his primary source of communications. If he's law enforcement, he has a body cam. That's pretty typical today. But what we're finding is that he's also carrying a smartphone. And that smartphone is either government provided to him, or his personal cell phone. And so if you think about what cellular is done to provide real-time information to the first responder when he's in his vehicle, we believe the smartphone will give him that same ability or a similar ability when he steps out of the vehicle. And so our thesis is that if we focus in on software applications that could sit on top of on a standard smartphone that the officer could carry, and those applications make him either safer or make him more efficient, that's going to open up a whole new market. Now, there's no proof of that, but we believe that is the next big wave. There are no real players in this space that are dominating because it's a brand new space. So everyone is kind of equal at it. And our thought is we need to think of some ideas, because it's software. We need to put those ideas or submit them for patent protection, and we need to launch some ideas and see what the feedback is. And SaaS business is not something you achieve overnight. And this is certainly not going to make a dent in our 2025 revenue of $100 million, which is what we said. That's all on the 5,000 and the 9,000. But when we look forward between 2025 and 2030, and we start looking at the shape of the company, if some of these ideas that we have start to materialize and gain traction, it can change the trajectory of the company quite radically. And so we just felt like it was worth the investment, right? Spend a little bit of money. There's a whole new space here. And if we get lucky a little bit and we land on some ideas, we could really change the company. So that was the thought process.
Very good. John, another question I have for you, when looking at the at your market, at the LMR market, who's the elephant? Forgive me for, I apologize to anybody who knows the BKTI story and the LMR market much better than me, so I apologize. But in your opinion, who's the elephant, and how do you continue to eke away at their share of the market right now?
No, I think that's an excellent question, Bobby. So Motorola Communications is as old, if not older, than we are. They're a $10 billion company worldwide focusing on public safety communications. They own about 70% of the market here in the US. So they're definitely the elephant in the room, as you said. So when we were focused on wildland fire, we had this technology, we had this base, we had this advantage, and it's very difficult for even Motorola to come in and kind of take market from us because of those things. But it's a pretty small piece of the overall market. Now we want to go reverse, right? We want to go see if we can start taking some of the market share, and we have, right, on the 5,000. It's shown that we can take some market share. The 9,000, completely different story. Now you're talking about getting into more of their mainstream products, and I'm sure that they're not going to be overly happy if we're too successful. That's true. Motorola is very, very strong in the urban centers. I look at the market into multiple tiers. 330 million people in the US. First 100 million people, they live in 50 counties in the US. I guarantee you they have 50 salespeople plus sitting on those customers, and they're pretty much all Motorola customers. It's very difficult to go in and sell a radio. If you take the next tier down, right, the next 100 million people, that's another 200 counties. We may sell some radios to them, but they tend to follow the top 50 counties. It's really in that third tier, right? The next 100 million people. There's 750 counties at that point, and you don't have any direct Motorola salespeople at that point. You have a lot of resellers, which we have as well. So you have more of I would say, a level playing field for sales reach, right? So that's a starting point. The second thing is these 750 counties tend to be a little bit more conservative in nature. Money actually matters to them. They don't have the tax base that the top 50 counties have. Today, they're spending about $2,500 for a single band radio, probably for Motorola, right? They're buying Motorola radios. They're spending about $2,500. So here's the interesting point, right? If you ask them if you could buy a multi-band radio today, would you buy one? Do you have a need for it? And they say, absolutely. We would outfit everyone with multi-band radios. And you say, well, why don't you buy them? We just can't afford to spend $5,000 or $8,000 on a multi-band radio from Motorola or L3Harris. It's not that we don't have a requirement. We just don't have the budget to outfit everyone with a multi-band radio. And so that's where our target is looking at those customers. There's a clear need in the tier 3 market for multi-band radios. That's what they really need. They just can't afford it. And so our strategy has been to position the BKR 9000 at the same price point as a single band Motorola radio, which is that $2,500. And so we'll be visiting these customers, and we have been visiting these customers, and basically showing them that says, look, you can continue to buy from our competitor, or you can have a look at our radio, and it does what you actually need it to do, but at the same price that you're paying today. That story seems to be resonating, and I'm not saying that we're going to capture 100% of that tier 3 market, but I certainly believe that we'll capture enough business to get to our $100 million target by 2025.
For sure. And I mean, you can see that chart in business school, right? Where you're trying to compete with that larger competitor, and you're like, okay, well, we're going to offer more for our radio, or there's going to be more functionality, but we're going to do it at the same price. You make it a no-brainer for them.
Yeah, and that functionality, the key with first responders, because it's not so much about price, right? I mean, they have to have the budget for it, obviously, right? But they're not as price conscious. It's about requirements, right? And like I said, the single band radio works fine in their own county on their own system, but first responders don't stay within their own county. Law enforcement crosses county lines. Fire trucks respond across county lines for interoperability, for the ability to support. And it's not unusual if you have an incident where you may have responders from 3 or 4 different counties responding to an incident in one specific county. The problem that they have today is when they cross those lines, unless they're using the same frequency band, same technology, they can't communicate. So
one question on that front is, do you have IP protecting that technology? Because what's stopping Motorola? All right, BK is coming in. They're scooping up some of our clients with the multi-band. Like, all right, let's just put that functionality in there, maybe upchart a little bit, and get rid of them. Like what's stopping Motorola from saying like, all right, well, let's come out with our own multi-band functionality and just, we'll keep it at that same price too, in order to keep these guys out, and then we'll just raise it a year from now.
Yeah, so Motorola's had multi-band technology for 5, 6, 7 years. So they've had it, right? They just sell it at $5,000 to $8,000 a radio, right? So here's the problem, right? I go in and sell one radio for $2,500. They're not going to price match me. I can sell 10 radios for $2,500. They're not going to price match me. There is a point at which I'm taking enough market share that perhaps they're going to start looking at reducing their prices, but they sell the lion's share of their multi-band radios are in the tier 1 and tier 2 markets. So if they lower their price, they lower their price across the board. And I would have to take a huge amount of market share from them before they would even consider dropping the price, because it once they price match me, then they have to price match it across the board, and they have more money to lose than the total value of our company. I mean,
I was going to say, at that point, they'll just buy you. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, and I'm happy to have that conversation, if they, they are very tough, and I don't want to underestimate. I think people understand how hard it is to go against the elephant in the room, or the 800-pound gorilla. We're taking a very simple approach. We're very focused on this, and it's all about need and staying within their budget. And the inhibitor that prevents L3 Harris has one, Motorola, both of these guys, they sell these radios. They need to sell these radios at that 5 to 8 to support their overall business structure. And they can't afford to sell it at a lower price because they just lose too much profits. It would hurt them dramatically. And so I think that's a nice niche for us to grow our business. We'll take a little bit of market share and grow our business to that $100 million mark by 2025.
Very good. All right. So, I'm going to get into some questions that I like to ask everybody on here. The first one being, like I said, you just presented in Vegas, you did this great fireside with Scott Weis from Semco, so some folks got to see the presentation there. I'm sure they've seen, folks even listening in who may have some familiarity, but what would you say investors, even after they get it, they're like, okay, I get what BK is up to. What do investors still maybe get confused about when thinking about BK Technologies, and maybe some frequently asked questions we can answer here?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest confusion is they look at BK in the past, right? If you look in the past, we've been a stagnant company, publicly traded for 20, 25 years, which is confusing. And so they don't quite understand, or maybe they understand but maybe don't believe the inflection point that's happening in the company, right? And so I say to them that this inflection point has not been something that was done overnight. We have 5 years of R&D spend behind us. We have one proven product that's shown that we can take market share. So it proves out the thesis that if we build a better product that's more appealing to the broader market, we can actually sell to the broader market. The 9,000 is the key trigger, because it represents 85% of that overall market. Again, I'm not looking at competing against the dog head to head. Let's be very strategic about it, and I don't need to get to $100 million. I think once I explain that to investors, they get it. And they're like, okay, I understand why you are now different than you were 5 years ago.
Very good. And then another question that, again, I ask everybody on here, in your opinion, what would you say are the company's downside risks? Like what stops, what could, you have your stated goal of 100 million by 2025. What comes in the way of attaining that goal other than execution risk? That's already a given. Let's say outside of that.
Yeah. What keeps me up at night, right?
Pretty much. Yes.
Yeah. Well, it was an easy answer last year with the supply chain issues. Getting the 9,000 development, for those investors who have been tracking us, they know that's been a while in development. That's been a huge relief, right? To be able to get that radio approved by the government and now start shipping radios. And customers, when they put it in their hand, they look at it, and with like anything you buy, right? You put it in your hand, you look at it, you feel it. And if it looks good and it feels good, then you're like, okay, this is something I'd be willing to buy. What's the cost? And you start digging into it a little bit more. But if it's something that's not appealing, doesn't look good, doesn't feel good, doesn't matter what price it is, right? You just kind of pass on it. One of the things I will say with the 9,000 is that everyone who's put one in their hand has said, this is a nice radio. It looks good and it feels good. And that's, to me, is half the battle of making a sale. So I would say I'm extremely encouraged now that the radio is shipping. I'm extremely encouraged with the feedback we're getting from the customers. And so, to be honest with you, I don't lose too much sleep these days. We're still working very hard to get the costs out of our core product radios, and that's a lot of work. And we're still very focused on that. But in terms of the prospects of growing the business and the success of the 9000, I think we've seen and heard enough to say that we have something here.
Very good. Another question that I like to ask everybody on here is, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, considering everything that happened in 2022, and obviously since you came in as CEO in July 2021, what would you say has been a challenge thus far in your tenure that you experienced and then have at least worked towards overcoming?
Yeah, besides the global supply chain meltdown,
yeah,
which by the way was a lot.
Yeah, I almost wanted to throw that one out because everybody is like, okay, supply chain was probably a nightmare.
Yeah. So, I think I came in at a great time. I mean, if you took that 1 year out of the picture, right, I would be 1 year in, not 2 years in. It was almost like a year or a year and a half of lost opportunity. We had to focus internally on the business. But if you look at where we are as a company, I don't think I could have come in at a better time. We had raised a ton of money just previously. The board is very supportive of really trying to make this company something, right? Either grow it so that we become, as part of the indexes with a decent sized market cap, and you do that organically or through acquisition, or you do things that make you so attractive, right, that you could be acquired and raise that shareholder value. So I think that we are very focused in either of those tracks. The things that we're doing fundamentally to improve our profitability and the sales of the 9000, I think you'll start seeing. I believe that the target we have set in 2025, $100 million and $20 million in EBITDA. That's a pretty substantial target for 2025. But if we actually achieve that, then you're generating enough cash that you can do a number of different things at that point. And so that's what's exciting to me as we look forward. I think that the timing for the company is really, really, really good.
All right. So my final question for you today, you said looking out to 2025, the stated goal, 100 million. From what you can tell us and in your opinion, where do you want to see the company even beyond that? And what would you say are those additional inflection points that'll get you there?
Yeah, that's another great question, right? I mean, I think the path to 2025 is clear for us. And I think the major hurdle, which was the launch of the 9000, is behind us. And so it's not a given, right, to go sell these radios. But we've proven, at least with the 5000, that we could take market share, and we're going to remain focused to get to that $100 million. I think as I look forward from 25 to 30, right, the question really is what do we want to be as a company? Do we want to continue to be focused exclusively on hardware, or do we want to expand our horizon? And that's really why we launched the SaaS business. And when you think about when we launched it, right, was in February of 2022, right? Not the best time to do it, but the board said that we think that's a good idea for us to start looking at software and public safety communications, that whole evolving market of public safety applications on smartphones. That takes a long time, right, to get in, especially since there's no clear answers on what that's going to look like. And so we started the business unit in February of 22. We hired a general manager from L3Harris, a gentleman named James Teal, who had already built a small SaaS business inside of L3Harris. And we brought him on board. And then, of course, we've launched our first product, Interop One. So I would say it's still TBD, right? Are we good enough? Do we have good enough ideas that we can protect via patents? Are these ideas material enough that customers will adopt these features and capabilities? That's still to be determined. But the fact is that we are investing a little bit of money in this space because we think the opportunity between 25 and 30 could be dramatic if we're on the right path. And certainly by 2025, we'll have a good view on that. Now, this says nothing for our core business, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that business is going to continue to grow. We're going to continue to generate cash, but it would be good to put that cash to work somewhere. And we think software applications on smartphones is a good place to put that money to work.
All right, I think we're there. John, thank you so much. Where can our audience go and find more information on BK Technologies?
Yeah, you can go visit us at bktechnologies.com, visit our investors portion of our website. And if you wanted to just trial our first software offering, it's a product called Interop One. It's a cell phone push-to-talk over cellular service. You can get a free trial. Just go to interop1.com and sign up for a free trial, and you can try it out.
Very cool. Well, John, thank you so much for joining me today. Really do appreciate it. Good luck. Stay safe. And I look forward to our next update.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not provided as financial, legal, or any other advice. The information is not investment advice or an offer to buy or sell any securities or make any investment. The views expressed by guest speakers are their own, and any reference to third-party products, services, or information does not constitute an endorsement thereof by SNN or its affiliates. SNN expressly disclaims all liability for any individual's use of the information presented in this podcast.